Kids are always playing pranks. I remember when I went to school, some of the kids used to put the girls' pigtails in the inkwells. Of course, I put the girls in the inkwells.
When it comes to sitcom families, few are as unforgettable as the Munsters. However, like many stories in Hollywood history, there's much more to this beloved series than what appears on the surface. Here are 25 shocking things you didn't know about the Munsters.
You can be black or yellow or white, it doesn't matter. What does matter is the size of your heart and the strength of your character.
Number 25. Lily Munster is canonically the strongest member of the Munster family. What's the Munster TV show without its whimsical patriarch, Herman? As a clear variation on the Universal Monsters version of Dr. Frankenstein's otherworldly creation, Herman is big and super scary to outsiders. In Mary Shelley's original novel, Herman was made from human parts, and that's why a lot of fans believed that he would be as strong as one. They couldn't be more wrong. Throughout the series and its never-ending reboots, reunions, and iterations, Herman has proven time and again why he's a juggernaut, way stronger than the average human being. Yet, he's a lovable man, son, and father who never fails to give us words of wisdom. But he is strong. Really strong. How strong is Herman Munster, you ask? Well, can you remember the My Fair Munster episode from the original series? During a hysterical discussion with Lily Munster at the end of the episode, Herman pounded his fist on the floor, causing a tremor that shook the entire house. And how about the time he forgot the combination to his safe? He broke the safe door just so he could pull some money out. My personal favorite, though, was an episode where the Munsters family went camping. As you'd expect, Herman's approach to setting up camp was a little unorthodox. When Lily complained they needed more shade from the sun, Herman took matters into his own hands. Literally, he uprooted the entire tree and covered his family with it instead of simply moving the tent to another place. Talk about a man who loves his wife. But speaking of wives, take nothing away from Lily Munster, the matriarch of the Munster family. Far from the average housewife, Lily is more than capable of holding her own. Despite the superhuman strength displayed by Herman throughout the series, there's a surprising twist that not a lot of fans picked up on. Lily was canonically stronger than him. In the episode Follow That Munster, Lily Munster completely blew our minds away. We're not going to spoil too much, so let's just say that her physical prowess made quite the impression. Looking back, it's one of the things that makes the Munsters such an amazing universe. I mean, sure, as the backbone of the family keeping everything in check, you'd expect a different kind of strength from Lily to balance Herman's brute force. Yet the reveal was a delightful twist that not only added a new layer to her character, but also challenged traditional gender stereotypes in a fun and somewhat unexpected way. So if you're someone who appreciates strong female characters challenging the status quo, please give it up for Lily Munster. But what if I told you she was a mere afterthought?
That's what I call flair.
Number 24, Lily Munster almost never existed. Yup, Lily Munster, the hauntingly delightful matriarch of the Munster family, was never a part of the original show. With her strikingly pale skin, flowing jet black hair, and a gothic wardrobe to match, Lily Munster is undoubtedly the heart of the family. Yet thanks to Yvonne De Carlo's iconic portrayal, Lily became a defining character in the Munsters, captivating audiences with her eerie beauty and motherly charm. Believe it or not, she didn't originally exist as we know her. In the original plot, the Munster matriarch was called Phoebe. Played by Joan Marshall, this character had a dark appearance and demeanor similar to Morticia Addams from The Addams Family, which raised concerns about the shows being too similar. To prevent unnecessary comparisons between the two shows, the directors had to take a different approach. Yvonne De Carlo replaced Marshall to play the newly created role of Lily Munster. But while you'd think the switch between actresses was a mere casting change, the truth is that it was a complete character overhaul. De Carlo, who was already a Hollywood star, took Lily from a Morticia-like figure into a character that could hold her own in a family of monsters, mixing maternal affection with a uniquely spooky style. Not that it came easy, though. At first, co-stars Gwyn and Al Lewis felt reservations about DiCarlo's ability to blend into the quirky family dynamic of the Munsters. And it didn't help either that her high standards for hair and makeup caused frequent delays on set, much to the chagrin of the cast and crew. Thankfully, her professionalism and undeniable talent were well worth the initial stress. She won over her co-stars, and together they established an on-screen chemistry that became central to the show's charm. Looking back, it's amazing what Yvonne DiCarlo did on the Munsters TV show. With Lily, DiCarlo delivered a character who was simultaneously nurturing and eerie, a devoted wife to Herman and a loving mother to Eddie, all the while navigating the strange yet relatable hurdles of family life in a haunted mansion. I can't imagine anyone else stealing the heart of the show, including her predecessor, Joan Marshall. Her transformation from Phoebe to Lily was inch perfect, turning what could have been a mere Morticia imitation into one of TV's most memorable moms.
Anybody gonna say how lovely I look?
Number 25, the real reason why Eddie Munster is a werewolf. If you've ever asked yourself why Eddie was a werewolf given his mother is a vampire and his dad was, well, Frankenstein's monster, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. On the one hand, you're not alone. The burning question has lingered in the hearts of 1 million fans across the world, but sadly, it's been left unanswered, especially by the creators. Who needs them when you've got us, though? First off, The Munsters takes place within its own fictional universe, where horror tropes don't necessarily function the same way they do in ours, so there's just not a lot to work from. But for what it's worth, Lily Munster had a werewolf brother named Lester Dragula, so that only means there's some recessive werewolf traits in the gene pool. Additionally, while Lily's mother had canonically passed away in the show, there are a lot of reasons to believe that she was a werewolf herself. According to actual folklore, werewolves, unlike vampires, are not immortal. They can actually die of ailments, old age, nasty cuts, and lots more. Given her death, it's plausible that she was a werewolf rather than an immortal vampire. Additionally, there are also unconfirmed theories that Lily is a vampire-werewolf hybrid. Yeah, you heard that right. In the first episode, Munster Masquerade, there's a subtle hint that Lily might have some werewolf traits, even though she appears to be a vampire. When the babysitter, Mrs. Morton, mentions that Eddie was well behaved, aside from his habit of howling like a wolf, Lily seemed puzzled and wondered if it wasn't normal for all kids to howl at the moon, a trait characteristic of werewolves and not vampires. Looking back, Lily's reaction shows that her idea of what's normal for children likely comes not just from her family and social circle, but possibly from her own childhood experiences too. She views her son's childhood as normal as her own, which could indicate that she herself howled at the moon as a child. And guess what? It's also entirely possible that Eddie is part werewolf from his father's side. Yes, Herman Monster is completely the monster of Victor Frankenstein, but he was made up of various individuals who might not all be humans in this universe. It's entirely possible that one of his parts came from a werewolf, which indirectly influenced his genetic contribution to Eddie. So where are we going with all this? A short answer to why Eddie Munster is actually a werewolf boils down to the fact that he is mixed with so many different phenotypes. His maternal grandmother was likely a werewolf, his uncle is one, and his own mother is possibly a hybrid. That's why he looks and acts like a werewolf, but still exhibits traits more commonly associated with vampires, like sleeping in a coffin or drawer chests. Number 22, Raven, the voice of 1,002 voices. The Munster family's quirky household at 1313 Mockingbird Lane included many eerie, unusual details, but personally, one of my favorite touches was the cuckoo bird clock in the family's living room with a dark twist. A raven instead of a traditional little bird popping out of the clock to shout, "Nevermore." Who else other than the Munster family could pull that off? However, as spooky as the raven sounded, the "Nevermore" scream was actually a reference to Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. But here's where it gets interesting. The cuckoo raven was actually brought to life by Mel Blanc. Yes, the legendary voice actor whose iconic resume includes amazing characters like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Porky Pig. Fondly known as the man of 1,000 voices, Blank is easily one of the most beloved voice actors of all time, and his uncredited contribution to the Munsters TV show was a secret, yet welcome surprise for fans. His smooth yet sinister delivery matched the spooky atmosphere of the show and added a much-needed layer of dark humor to exclaim the family's playful take on humor. Was there any surprise, though? Mel was a legend. We wouldn't expect anything less from him. But while it's no longer a secret that Mel Blanc voiced a small role on the Munsters TV show, he wasn't the only mastermind behind The Raven. Now, here's a fun challenge for you. Do you think you have what it takes to guess who else might have voiced the Raven? Lock down your answers in the comments below, but don't cheat. Done that already? Well, chances are you're wrong. It was in fact Bob Hastings who joined Mel Blanc. Best known for his role in McHale's Navy and later as Commissioner Gordon in 1992's Batman the Animated Series, Hastings added his own flair to the Raven's signature line, making a seemingly unforgettable clock one of the most unforgettable parts of the Munsters' creepy, kooky set. His remarkable voice acting versatility and ability to bring depth to a wide range of characters shone yet again. So next time you hear that familiar "Nevermore," remember it's a little piece of TV magic from two iconic voices of the time.
Now for the secret ingredient. A woman's tears. Ooh, that's mighty powerful stuff.
Number 21, the characters are more than meets the eye. Despite airing from 1964 to 1966, The Munsters is easily one of the most beloved classics of American television history. With its unique blend of spooky humor and oddball family values, the show captured the hearts of viewers across the world. But have you ever paid close attention to the family's dynamics? One of the fascinating quirks of the Munsters was that each family member contradicted the traditional folklore surrounding their monstrous identities. Starting with Grandpa, the centuries-old vampire, his powers seem to align with vampire lore. He lives in a dungeon, shies away from daylight, and even rides a coffin car. Yet his penchant for potions and spells is polarizing. Vampires typically shapeshift, but it's unusual for them to dabble into spells, potion making, and even alchemy. That's witch territory. And don't even get us started with Herman Monster. Modeled after the classic Frankenstein's monster, Herman surprisingly breaks away from the expected monster characteristics. In literary folklore, Frankenstein's monster is often depicted as a misunderstood, withdrawn, and sometimes hostile beast. Yet Herman is an affectionate, optimistic father who's more than a little goofy. His role as a caring husband and father, paired with his eagerness to tinker in his lab, defies the Frankenstein image of a solitary, struggling creature. Not that we're complaining, though. His gentleness and amazing sense of humor made him the heart of the family and an easy fan favorite. As for Lily Munster, Herman's wife, she's a vampire with a strikingly practical, no-nonsense attitude. This one's a bit headcanon, but vampires are often seen as suave, seductive figures who lure others with their charm. They're typically aloof and mysterious, yet Lily is the backbone of the Munster household. She uses her cool head to organize the family, nurture them, and keep them together. Then there's Eddie Munster, the family's young werewolf. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry who have picked up a book on werewolf lore knows that the mystical creature thrives in packs, symbolizing loyalty and hierarchy. Typically, a young werewolf is bound by a closely knit pack structure and would follow the guidance of their elders. Yet, Eddie turns this idea on its head by being a rebellious, prank-loving kid, constantly defying parental expectations and getting on their nerves. Personally, I loved his antics and mischievous personality. It added a much-needed layer to his character and set him apart from typical werewolves. But hey, it's still worth mentioning. Ironically, not even the most normal family monster was left out of the twist. As the family's loyal pet, Spot fit right into the Munster family dynamic. However, two of his masters were vampires. Fire is one of their weaknesses, and it just so happens that Spot breathes just that. Finally, despite coming from a long line of spooky monsters, Marilyn was a stark contrast to her monster-like relatives. She didn't have powers, appeared human, and portrayed nothing out of the ordinary. Yet she was seen as the odd one out in the family, the ironic monster. Most of the time, Herman would hope that a decent local boy would gain Marilyn's hand in marriage and take her off their hands forever. It's hard to blame them, though. In a monster universe completely different from ours, average humans will always be the odd figures. But hey, if you were a big fan of Marilyn, you might want to hear what's next. Number 20. Beverly Owen hated every second of the Munsters. Despite being a natural brunette, it didn't take long for Beverly Owen to rise through the ranks for her portrayal of the sweet and kind-hearted niece in the peculiar Munster family, Marilyn Munster. Her performance was well received, and she became a fan favorite, endearing audiences with her warmth and genuine presence. However, what's Hollywood without its fair share of well-kept secrets? Unbeknownst to many fans and viewers, Owen's experience on the show was anything but a bed of roses. Right off the bat, Owen explained that she didn't want to live in California, but Universal convinced her to audition for the pilot anyway. From the very beginning, Owens was deeply homesick, not just for the familiar comforts of home, but for her fiancé who was living in New York. Being miles away from her love bug as filming continued in California, Owen despised featuring on the show. Each passing day on set was a painful reminder of how lonely she was. Soon the separation took a heavy toll on her mental and emotional well-being, and yes, it only got worse. When the Munsters was greenlit, Owen told Universal that she didn't want to do the show any longer, but a deal was a deal. She was bound by a contract, and talent agent Monique James threatened legal action against her if she dared to break it. Can you believe it? The role that brought her fame was also the source of her greatest anguish. Like a bird desperately wanting to leave its cage, Owen was completely distressed, and she often ran off the set in tears. Her misery only ended when she completed the 13 episodes stipulated in her contract. She immediately returned to New York and reunited with her lover. This set the ball rolling for Pat Priest, who kept the role for the rest of the series. Luckily, her seamless transition ensured that the character continued to thrive. Some may even say that Priest was born to play Marilyn. In any case, now that you know the touching story of Beverly Owen, have you ever wondered why Pat Priest's transition into the role was so seamless? Here's another intriguing chapter of the Munsters, the behind-the-scenes magic that made Pat Priest's transition into the role so seamless. Number 19. The story behind Pat Priest's inch-perfect transition. Make no mistake, one of the most difficult things for producers to do is make a smooth transition between actors, especially for a show as big as the Munsters. For Beverly Owen, playing Marilyn Munster was a complete bore. She couldn't wait to leave the role and reunite with her lover back east. Her exit left both fans and crew wondering what would happen next, especially given the fact that Marilyn Munster was a major character and Beverly Owen, for all of her dismay, actually portrayed the character inch perfectly. Getting a new actress to replace her would have been easy, and how would the fans have taken the switch? Just think about it for a second. How many times have we seen beloved characters replaced only to have the show suffer for it? It's happened a gazillion times. A lot of things could have gone wrong, and the show could have imploded. So you can imagine how lucky the production was to get a new actress who not only matched her predecessor, but also brought her own unique flair to the role. And guess what? They didn't even need to do too much. This so-called perfect replacement was just hanging around the corner. Priest, the daughter of United States Treasurer Ivy Baker Priest, was more than just a convenient substitute. She was the perfect fit, sharing the same blonde hair and stature as Owen. What were the odds? Looking back, it wasn't just luck, it was a casting miracle. Pat Priest's resemblance to Owen meant she could slip into the Marilyn outfits without any costly adjustments. This was a huge win for the production team, saving both time and money. More importantly, it meant the audience barely noticed the change. So you see, Priest's portrayal of Marilyn preserved the character's essence and maintained the show's continuity and charm. But it wasn't just about aesthetics, though. Priest was also a standout pick because of her background. As the daughter of U.S. Treasurer Ivy Baker, Priest came to the show buzzing with some free publicity, music to the ears of the producers. In all, the producers' choice to cast Priest turned out to be a masterstroke. So I guess the saying is true after all. Sometimes fate has a sense of humor. But despite this smooth run on television, Universal Pictures controversially recast the role with Debbie Watson for the 1966 movie Munster Go Home, which upset fans who had come to love Priest's portrayal. As we drive down memory lane to explore more shocking behind-the-scenes secrets of one of the most iconic TV shows of all time, you might want to fasten your seatbelt, all puns intended. Coming next is another facet of the Munsters that will leave your pulse racing.
Very nice exhaust.
Nice. I'll have you know, Herman, that this is the only dragster in America that could play Oh Promise Me in...
Number 18, the origins of the Dragula. Remember that ghoul on wheels from Hot Rod Herman? Yes, that's the episode when Grandpa Munster built a quirky car to take on a local dragster in an unforgettable race. That's right, I'm referring to the Dragula, the darkly brilliant creation that, even with its small role, quickly won over fans of the Munsters films. Designed by the brilliant project engineer George Barris, the Dragula captured imaginations with its eerie charm. And don't even get me started on its unconventional design. With its ghoulish build and feel, this eerie car made a lasting impact on pop culture, sparking numerous recreations over the years. Even rock musician Rob Zombie honored Grandpa Munster's creepy ride with his song Dragula. Oh, you knew that already? Alright then, fine. You must be a major Munsters buff. But hey, I bet you didn't know that beyond its incredible and otherworldly appearance, the Dragula has an even more captivating backstory. One filled with legal challenges and rather inventive solutions. Wondering how? Well, you see, filmed in North Hollywood, the production faced a peculiar challenge. As funny as it actually sounds on paper, regulations at that time prohibited buying a coffin without a death certificate. This rule became a big obstacle since their creators were set on using a genuine coffin to build the car. For George Barris, a master of inventive car designs, a real coffin was essential to his creation. It was either that or nothing, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Curious about what he did next? Under the guise of night, Barris arranged a secretive deal with a local funeral director, paying cash for a casket that was quietly collected from the back door of the funeral home. This daring maneuver allowed Barris and his team to bring the Dragula to life, adding an authentic touch to the show's spooky aesthetics. If you really think about it, it's easy to see why Barris was so insistent. The Dragula's design, featuring a coffin body, organ pipes, and a tombstone grill, perfectly matched the Munster family's ghoulish yet lovable image. We wouldn't dare make this list without talking about it. So the next time you think of the Munsters, do well to remember the Dragula. The eerie car of Grandpa Munster was so close to never existing. It was born out of quirky genius and clandestine night deals, a fitting car for a vampire. But speaking of cars, it's also worth mentioning that the family car was anything but ordinary. Crafted by designer Tom Daniel and built by George Barris, the Munster coach was a hot rod based on an extended 1926 Ford Model T chassis with a custom hearse-style body. Spanning 18 feet, it cost almost $20,000 to build at the time, equivalent to over $200,000 today. Number 17, Kenneth Strickland designed Grandpa Munster's laboratory. When it comes to iconic film sets, only a few have left a lasting impression, quite like Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory from the 1931 Frankenstein. Filled with crackling electrical equipment, bubbling beakers, and eerie machinery, the lab became the defining image of a mad scientist's workshop and set the stage for future horror films. It was inch perfect. The chilling aesthetic of the lab seeped into countless TV shows and movies after it, influencing everything from suspenseful thrillers to tongue-in-cheek horror comics like the Munsters. And of course, the man behind this unforgettable set was the genius himself, Kenneth Strickland. As an expert in high-voltage electricity, he was an excellent film set designer and electric special effects extraordinaire. Using his skills as a carnival electrician, he created the science fiction toolkit that can be seen in over 100 films and television programs. The man was simply a dawn of light and sound. But for all of his amazing works in Hollywood, it was his work for James Whale's 1931 masterpiece Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, and Ghost of Frankenstein that struck like, well, lightning. Take nothing from him though, he was far from a Frankenstein pony. In the 1960s, he was tapped again to contribute to the Munsters. And there, his eye for electrifying detail brought Grandpa Munster's laboratory to life. If you pay close attention, You can even see that Grandpa's lab on the Munsters closely mirrored Dr. Frankenstein's iconic workspace, from the retro machinery to the complex arcane devices scattered around. And no, it wasn't just a fun Easter egg. The continuity was deliberate and not only served as a clever nod to horror cinema's past, but also infused the Munsters with a sense of respect for its horror roots. Plus, the mimicking designs effectively bridged the gap between the eerie terror of Frankenstein and the lighthearted, macabre humor of the Munsters. This ensured that Grandpa's lab became as memorable on the small screen as Dr. Frankenstein's lab was on the big screen. Apart from the Munsters, you can also see Strickland's impressive inventions in The Wizard of Oz, The Mask of Fu Manchu, and his last project, Young Frankenstein. He often reused carefully preserved pieces, like his cosmic ray diffuser from the original Frankenstein. Wondering what other classic horror secrets the Munsters hid away from you? Stick around, because the next revelation may just haunt your memory. Number 16. Herman Monsters' unbearable costume. Let's be honest, when you think about the Munsters, the first character that likely comes to mind is Herman Monster. It's only natural, as the towering, lovable family head with a heart as big as his stature, Frankenstein's monster was simply an unforgettable character. And don't even get me started on the fact that Gwyn embodied the character to the T. With his towering height and imposing physicality, Gwyn was Herman in person. They even had the same warmth and clumsy charm that naturally draws people in. However, what many might not realize is that behind the lovable monster mask, Gwyn faced considerable hardships during production. No, he was neither under a witch hunt nor facing personal challenges that affected his emotional and mental well-being, like his co-star Beverly Owen. Gwyn's problem was something different. It was on set. Starting with Gwyn's unforgettable Frankenstein costume, it may have looked amazing on screen, but it was anything but comfortable. He even walked around the set in boots with 4-inch soles specifically crafted to boost his towering presence. And make no mistake, those weren't your typical walking shoes. These boots were heavy, bulky, and solid, more suited for paving roads than casual strolling, making each step a real challenge. Just take a look at this. And to make things worse, there was more where that came from. Gwyn's imposing look as Herman required him to wear several pounds of foam padding, all while enduring the intense heat from studio lights that made the set feel like an oven. The relentless heat caused him to lose 10 pounds in just the first season due to constant sweating. And despite occasional lemonade breaks to stay hydrated, Gwyn struggled with back pain due to the weight and strain of the costume. But that's not to say production did nothing to remedy the situation, at least to some extent. To help Gwyn manage the intense heat, the crew set up an air compressor to blow cool air into his costume between takes. This makeshift cooling system offered some relief, though it couldn't fully ease the discomfort. So the next time you watch the Munsters and laugh at Herman's hysterical antics, remember the incredible effort Fred Gwyn put into making this beloved character unforgettable. If anything, I admire his dedication. Not many actors could have endured such grueling conditions with that level of resilience. Take, for instance, the fact that the makeup for Herman Monster took a whopping 3 hours to apply before filming. Gwyn would have to arrive hours before his co-stars just so that he could get his prosthetic pieces and makeup done. So yeah, Gwyn definitely deserves all the recognition he got for his time on the show. Number 15. There were 3 actors for Eddie Munster. Werewolf this, vampire that. Forget about the mystical creatures in the Munster family. Casting changes is the true DNA. While we remember the young, mischievous werewolf played by Butch Patrick, it's quite a surprise to learn that he wasn't even the original Eddie. Yes sir, you heard that right. In the pilot episode, Eddie Munster is actually portrayed by Happy Durman, who fully embraces Eddie's wolfish side. He was rowdier, wilder, more feral, and more, werewolfy. However, executives felt disenchanted by the animalistic energy. They believed that the approach was a tad too intense for the family-friendly direction they wanted the series to take. So, when the Munsters got the green light for a full series, Butch Patrick was brought on to replace Durman. Eddie Munster's appeal was also toned down for a more playful, slightly rebellious spirit without leaning too far into the wolfy aspect. Thankfully, Patrick's portrayal struck the right balance, and his take on Eddie quickly won over fans. Who knew all it took to make a half-wolf, half-human child of the Munster family so special was a lovable actor? Ready for another fascinating twist? Lost in Space star Bill Mumy was the preferred pick to play Eddie before the pilot was filmed, but his parents ultimately decided against it because of the extensive makeup required. Although he never played Eddie, Mumy did make a guest appearance on the show in the episode Come Back, Little Googie, giving fans a glimpse of what might have been. Despite Eddie's consistent portrayal by Patrick throughout the original series, even this fan-favorite role saw another change in the 1980s. When the Munsters were revived for a made-for-TV movie, The Munsters' Revenge, in 1981, Butch Patrick had long aged out of playing young Eddie, so the producers had to recast the character yet again, this time as K.C. Martell. But while most fans still consider Butch Patrick as the quintessential Eddie Munster, it's worth saying that all three actors brought something unique to Eddie's persona. Sure, Martell and Dermond may not have fully captured Eddie's wolfish charm, but each actor did their best with the role. But what's your take? Which of the three do you think nailed Eddie's character the most? While you're locking your answer in the comments down below, here's another Munster secret I bet you had no idea about. Number 14. The Munsters almost started as a cartoon. Can you imagine a world where the Munsters weren't the live-action, monster-loving family we know and adore, but instead an animated cartoon? That feels a bit crazy, right? Well, what if I told you that this nearly happened back in the 1940s? According to legend, the idea of a quirky, monster-based family sitcom was first pitched by none other than Bob Clampett, the famed animator behind Looney Tunes and creator of characters like Porky Pig, Daffy Duck, and Tweety. Now, at some point, Clampett spoke with Universal Studios about a project called The Monster Family, long before the Munsters were ever conceived as live-action characters. It was supposed to cover a family of goofy, lovable monsters who blur the lines between horror and comedy. At the time, Universal was easily the undisputed leader in horror cinema. With iconic monster films like Phantom of the Opera, Son of Dracula, The Invisible Man Returns, and The Wolf Man, the studio was head and shoulders above everyone in the horror genre, with sequels and adaptations that kept audiences completely glued to their seats. With Clampett's project, the studio would have been able to blend horror with comedy in a way that would later come to define the Munsters. But despite the prospects and Clampett's winning reputation, Universal were disillusioned with the idea. They let it get cold and, well, it kind of fell under the cracks. Clampett would go on to greatness. After he parted ways with Warner Brothers Cartoons in 1945, Clampett developed the puppet show Time for Beanie, as well as the animated series Beanie and Cecil. The latter was extremely popular, and it went on to become one of the first creator-driven TV series, further cementing Clampett's gift for pioneering concepts in television. If Universal had gone for his original Monster Family idea, Clampett might have steered the Munsters into becoming one of the first animated monster sitcoms on television. But I guess we'll never know. But this brings us to the million-dollar question. Would the Munsters have been better as a cartoon? I'm on the fence for this one because there are genuine reasons for both. On the one hand, an animated Munsters series would have better illustrated the crazy humor Clampett was known for. If everything ticked, the Munsters would have been a highly creative, experimental series that stood apart from other monster shows. Plus, the producers would have been able to bring more ideas to life. Take the pet dragon, Spot, for instance. His full body was never created for the Munsters. Only his head appeared when the staircase opened, sometimes with a fiery breath, and his tail was occasionally shown. Animating a full body would have been more immersive. However, the live-action format, on the other hand, made the show not only suitable for children, but also millions of adults across the world. It's an appeal that may have been lost in animation. Then again, the angel you know is better than that which you don't, right? So what do you think? Would the Munsters have been even more beloved as an animated cartoon, or was the live-action approach the Midas touch it needed?
Grandpa, you must have taken the wrong pill. You're not a horse, you're a goat. I can tell because horses don't have horns.
Just sit there, Herman. Give me another.
Number 13. The Munsters' original pitch was stolen. While almost every Munsters fan can narrate the origins of the TV show in their sleep, let's give the benefit of the doubt to those who might not know the backstory, or to, hey, accurately recall it. The origins of the Munsters TV show began with producer Alan Burns and writer Chris Hayward, the masterminds behind The Bullwinkle Show and The Rocky and Bullwinkle Show. While having a casual discussion, the duo came up with the idea of a family of monsters living in the suburbs. Seeing potential, they brought this vision to Universal Studios, who loved the concept and set the ball rolling for production. The producers enlisted artist Bob Clampett to design the characters, while Fred Gwynn was cast as the lovable, bumbling Herman Monster. From there, the Munsters quickly came together, merging horror, comedy, and family drama into what would later become an iconic sitcom. But as coming of age as it sounds, was that really the full story? Contrary to what many think, the journey to the screen wasn't as straightforward as it seemed, and there were some crazy twists. Walk with me here. In the early 1960s, traditional family sitcoms ruled television, but everything changed when networks started leaning into more unconventional ideas to help freshen up their programming. Remember the flurry of supernatural shows that sprung up like daisies? Shows like Bewitched, My Favorite Martian, and I Dream of Jeannie featured supernatural creatures like witches, aliens, and genies. And that, guys, is why Alan Burns and Chris Hayward seized the moment to pitch their version. A family of weirdos, inspired by Charles Addams' cartoons. If Munsters actually clicked, it'd be starkly different from the wholesome families of past sitcoms. However, the Munster dream almost turned into a nightmare for the pair when Universal pitched their idea without giving them proper credit. If it hadn't been for the Writers Guild of America intervening, Burns and Hayward might have been sidelined entirely. They managed to get recognized, though it was tucked away in the credits as "from a format by." Still in high spirits, Burns went on to co-create The Mary Tyler Moore Show and Rhoda, ushering yet another era of television classics. But what if the story had played out differently? What if the Munsters aired without its original creators ever getting recognized? It makes us wonder how often nefarious practices like this play out, this time with the good guys on the losing side. Number 12, CBS changed the Munsters to feature the Universal Monsters. When CBS took the Munsters into development, the studio made a couple of significant changes that altered the show's direction completely. One of them in particular was the use of black and white. That, spoiler alert, we'd soon talk about. But also, instead of simply creating a family of quirky weirdos as originally intended, CBS made it clear that the family should include Universal's iconic monster characters. Universal Studios held the rights to Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, and the Wolfman, and since the 1950s aired many classic monster films on television. With a solid fan base built over the years, the studio found that there was still an impressive audience for these decades-old monster movies, so why not breathe new life into them once again? As such, they developed a standard 1960s sitcom nuclear family, albeit with Frankenstein's monster as Herman Monster and Count Dracula as his father-in-law. But make no mistake, there were a lot of benefits. The approach not only streamlines rights management, but also allows Universal to leverage its existing trademarks, costumes, and props to simultaneously reduce production costs and add a familiar appeal. Additionally, the reuse of well-known figures made it easier for the studio to make merchandise, as characters from the Munsters were instantly recognizable to older fans of Universal's monster movies. With all said and done, CBS handed the concept over to writers Norm Liebman and Ed Haas, who both leveraged their extensive experience with hit shows like The Dick Van Dyke Show, Get Smart, and Maude. They wrote the pilot script, Love Thy Monster, and, well, the rest, as they say, became history. Looking back, had CBS stuck with the initial idea of generic monsters, the Munsters might not have achieved its lasting impact. So, it was a pretty good idea in the end. Using the classic Universal Monsters not only took advantage of horror's golden era, but also made smooth sailing for production. But hey, remember when I told you the use of monochrome colors changed the direction of the Munsters TV show? Great, here's how it rewrote history, one episode at a time. Number 11, why the Munsters went black and white. For Gen Z and millennials and viewers, it might be hard to imagine a world where TV was almost exclusively in black and white, but it had such a vibe. From silent films to noirs to even classic monochrome sitcoms, black and white films are a nostalgic piece of cinematic history. But in the 1960s, color TVs began to circulate, leaving many shows of the time with a big dilemma. CBS was no different, and they had to choose between going all in on color or sticking with classic black and white. Although the former was certainly an option by then, the studio had to carefully consider their options before going in. Color TVs were a luxury that many families couldn't afford, so CBS sat back and stuck with black and white for the series. But apart from the fact that not all viewers actually had color TVs at the time, there are other probable theories as to why CBS made the decision. A common one is that it was simply to save cost. At the time, filming in color was more expensive than in black and white, and studios were careful about production budgets, especially for new shows. Secondly, there's another theory that CBS wanted the Munsters to echo the eerie, gothic look of classic Universal monster movies that inspired the series. After all, it already copied the props. Given the fact that earlier films like Dragula and Frankenstein were famously dark and atmospheric, choosing black and white only felt natural. It was a consistent horror movie aesthetic, and there wasn't exactly a pressing reason to change it. You know how it goes. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Finally, there's also the possibility that the network wanted to avoid scaring younger viewers by keeping the visuals toned down in black and white. Alas, while monochrome pictures may have initially given the Munsters a distinctive, spooky feel, it likely contributed to the show's decline as color TV grew in popularity. By 1966, audiences had grown accustomed to seeing their favorite shows in vibrant hues, so the Munsters felt obsolete in comparison. Take, for instance, ABC's Batman. When the Cape Crusading series debuted in full color, audiences immediately flocked to it, and you can't even blame them. Batman was dynamic, had eye-catching visuals, was able to convey subtle pieces that monochrome shows like The Munsters couldn't. With the shift in viewing preferences, the show was sadly canceled after only 2 seasons. In any case, I'm quite curious about your thoughts. With the rise of Batman marking the steep decline of the Munsters, would you say that CBS missed an opportunity by sticking with black and white? Or was it just one big coincidence? It's a fascinating question that's still being debated by Munster aficionados, so let us know in the comments below. While you're at it, here's another Munster secret you never knew. Number 10. The Munsters was colored. Yes, you definitely heard that right. The Munsters didn't always stick to monochrome colors. While you can argue that the show was obviously way better looking in black and white, there were actually several times the Munsters family appeared in full color. The first instance was the pilot episode, My Fair Munster. Filmed in color, this episode was test screened before the network finally agreed to shift the series into black and white. We've already talked about some of the possible reasons why that happened, but still, there were consequences, good and bad. In any case, though, the unaired pilot episode wasn't the only time the Munsters family ventured into the realms of color. In the 1966 film Munster Go Home, which took the family on a wild adventure across the pond to England, a standout example. I'm not going to spoil much, but in the film, Herman inherited a mansion and a title from a British earl. Then the family journeys across the pond to England, only to stumble across a counterfeiting scheme. Not only did this movie bring the Munsters characters into a vibrant color setting, but it also stripped away the canned laughter familiar to TV audiences. Now you can throw shade on it for being different, but personally, I think that's what made the film unique. It was a little odd to find yet another actress playing Marilyn, though. Moving on to 1973, and the Munsters were in color yet again, this time in the 1-hour mini Munster series aired on ABC as part of the ABC Saturday Superstar movie series. And again, we're not going to be shading it, especially given the animated TV movie brought Al Lewis back to voice Grandpa. If you haven't seen it yet, you probably should. The plot had the same crime-fighting theme that featured in many of the original series episodes. There are already a couple other times the Munsters appeared in color, but I'm sure you get the gist already. Whether the Munsters would have been more successful if it had been aired in color from the start is another question entirely. And hey, it shouldn't even be a debate. Colors were refreshing. It brought a fresh, modern appeal to families upgrading to color TV sets in the 1960s. But the TV show looked better in black and white, and maintain the same spooky, eerie appeal of former monster masterpieces. There's no way to know how different the show's fate could have been, so let's just enjoy the fact that we were born in a time when the show aired. Speaking of time,
Ride on in and let me pour you a nice glass of champagne.
Number 9. Grandpa was actually younger than Lily. Better known to the Munsters fans as Grandpa, Count Sam Dragula was not only an undead vampire, but also the doting, sometimes annoying, whimsical father of Lily Munster. Played by Al Lewis, who championed the character's charm and wit to perfection, Grandpa became a fan favorite thanks to his eccentric potions and an unwavering devotion to his family, especially his daughter, Lily Munster. Their father-daughter relationship was one of the show's most endearing aspects throughout its run, and we can never forget the unending jokes, tussles, and sarcastic quips. Remember the Lily Munster Girl Model episode? No? Well, that's a shame. It was one of the episodes that perfectly captured the dynamic between Lily, Herman, and Grandpa. On the episode, Lily decided to use her free time to pursue a job as a model, but this doesn't sit well with Herman. Convinced that her new career would attract the attention of other men, Herman became jealous and upset. To help Herman in a scheme to make Lily equally jealous, Grandpa transforms himself into a woman using his magical potions, hoping their plan will make her rethink the modeling gig. But while I leave you to ponder how it all ended, here's the actual twist. Although Grandpa was Lily's father in the show, did you know that the actor playing him was actually younger than the actress who portrayed Lily? No, we're not kidding. Yvonne DiCarlo was born on September 1st, 1922 in Vancouver, Canada, while Al Lewis was born on the 30th of April, 1923 in New York City. And guess what? She became an actress long before he did. Lewis began his acting career in 1953, 13 years after DiCarlo had already been acting. The reason why he appeared much older than his on-screen daughter, Lily. Thanks to makeup and costuming, Lewis's appearance as Grandpa was aged up to make him look significantly older. So again, the saying is true. Nothing in Hollywood is quite as it seems. Number 8. Al Lewis was not the first choice to play Grandpa. Speaking of Grandpa, can we take a moment to appreciate Al Lewis once again? Among the quirky characters that populated that show, Grandpa was probably the most seamless. His jokes were natural, he was the life of the party, and his daring antics led to a lot of interesting additions to the show, like the Dragula. Having a unique blend of humor and old-world vampire antics, Grandpa Munster was one of the most recognizable sitcom faces in old Hollywood. And behind it all was Al Lewis, the man who brought Grandpa Munster to life with his iconic portrayal. Not to toot the man's horn, but Al Lewis had one of the most impeccable comedic timings on the show, and boy, was he good at delivering. Rare traits as such were very uncommon at the time, so it's no surprise why he won over audiences and made Grandpa Munster one of the more iconic characters in television history. But hey, what if I told you that we were so close to missing out on Lewis's masterpiece? You see, before Al Lewis was cast as Grandpa Munster, the role went through several considerations as he wasn't the first choice for the character. The creators of the show preferred the role going to Burt Lahr, who was known for playing the Cowardly Lion in The Wizard of Oz. However, for reasons that remain somewhat ambiguous in historical records, Lahr declined the offer to hop on to the Munster universe. This opening paved the way for Al Lewis to audition, and, well, the rest is history. Looking back, I'm really grateful things played out the way they did. There weren't many actors who could do a better job of portraying Grandpa Munster. But guess what? Not even Fred Gwynn and Butch Patrick were the creators' original choices either. Contrary to what many people think, the role of Herman Monster was first offered to Western icon John Carradine, while young Bill Mumy was the preferred candidate to star as Eddie Munster. But his parents declined the offer, citing costume concerns. Trivia buffs might also enjoy learning that Al Lewis was actually a political activist in real life and ran for office a couple of times. He even had a U.S. senatorial campaign in 1998 where he ran against Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Number 7. The Addams Family Coincidence. Face it guys, ever since the debut of the Munsters and the Addams Family, both shows have been locked in a perpetual comparison game that still exists to this very day. And to be fair, it's easy to see why these two iconic TV shows are so often compared. Both shows center on a close-knit and loving families who revel in the macabre and unconventional. Both series ran for 2 seasons, with the Munsters totaling 70 episodes and the Addams Family featuring 64 episodes. And both properties have been revised numerous times in the decades since the original shows. Plus, the characters are starkly similar. In the Munsters, the family consists of Herman, Lily, Grandpa, Eddie, and their normal cousin Marilyn, all residing in a haunted mansion with plots that frequently poke fun at classic horror themes. In contrast, the Addams Family includes Gomez, Morticia, Wednesday, Pugsley, Uncle Fester, and Lurch in their gothic mansion, with their escapades also infused with dark humor. The question of who's more successful and enduring is debatable, but the visual aesthetics of both series also invite comparisons. Remember when the Phoebe Munster persona got shelved because of the family's physical similarities with Morticia Addams from the Addams Family? The similarity sparked such intense discussion that the producers had to make adjustments to avoid direct comparison between the two shows, not that it fully resolved the issue. You see, while the Addams Family debuted on ABC, CBS's The Munsters made its debut in the same year and in fact only a week apart. This raised questions of foul play and unfair competition. But here's the thing. The idea that one studio copied the other is mostly exaggerated. Although the thematic similarities are undeniable, the creation of these shows was more of a coincidence than anything else. Walk with me here. The Munsters was conceived as a parody of Universal Studios' classic monster movies, and its pre-production phase actually began before the Addams Family, while the birth of the latter resulted from ABC's desire to bring Charles Addams' darkly whimsical cartoons to life. CBS envisioned a sitcom centered on a spooky yet humorous family, and they developed the concept without any awareness of ABC's plans. And if you're still suspicious about the close release dates, here's what actually happened. ABC rushed to release the Addams Family to avoid being overshadowed by CBS's The Munsters. They were concerned about their rival dominating a unique genre, and the only way to prevent it was by releasing their show as soon as possible. So you see, while The Munsters and the Addams Family might seem like rivals born from a copycat move, the truth was definitely far from it. They were two independently developed shows that just so happened to be in the same niche. And the aftermath was one to behold. Millions of viewers across the world were drawn into the whimsical world of both universes. It's only sad that The Munsters didn't air for so long. It was shelved after 2 seasons, the culmination of a massive reduction in following and depleted ratings. Moving on though, did you know that The Munsters shared more than just familiar traits with the Addams Family? It also mirrored another classic American sitcom, Leave It to Beaver.
Don't I have any rights in this house?
Oh.
I just opened the window.
Well, sorry, Grandpa, but you let out all our musty air.
How fresh air affects my sinus.
Number 6. The Munsters have an odd connection with Leave It to Beaver. Despite the fact that The Munsters and Leave It to Beaver were both popular shows for CBS, many might not recognize the connection between them, which is really funny because The Munsters is basically a parody of Leave It to Beaver. Now, for the benefit of those who never saw the sitcom, Leave It to Beaver aired from 1957 to 1963, and the show centers around the Cleaver family, particularly the 2 young brothers, Beaver and Wally, who overcome the everyday challenges and misadventures of childhood and family life. It gained widespread appraisal for its wholesome representation of American family values, and yes, it was incredibly funny. It influenced many subsequent family-oriented sitcoms, including The Munsters. Before crafting the latter, Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher, the creative minds behind Leave It to Beaver, took their sitcom expertise to a whole new level, taking the suburban bliss of Leave It to Beaver and flipping it into a haunted mansion full of oddities and laughter. Interestingly, both shows were filmed on the same Universal Pictures lot, and if you were an eagle-eyed viewer, then you might have spotted the Munsters' iconic house making cameo appearances in Leave It to Beaver. And guess what? In later years, it was used in Coach and Desperate Housewives, among others. Speaking of which, did you know that the Munsters family lived at 1313 Mockingbird Lane in Mockingbird Heights? While the original series didn't pinpoint an exact location, later adaptations indicated that the address was likely in Los Angeles, California. Before we talk about the next item on our list, if you're still with us, chances are you're thoroughly enjoying our expose of the most shocking truths about the Munsters TV show. So why don't you hit the subscribe button and turn on the post notifications so you'll be in the loop whenever we release a new video. It'll only take you a second. Already subscribed? Great, let's move on to secret number 5. Number 5, the secret behind the Munsters comic books. Remember the time when Munsters merchandise was all in all of our faces? I'm certainly not complaining though. Say what you want about CBS, but the studio certainly knew how to capitalize on nostalgia and iconic characters. As said earlier, the studio took advantage of Universal Monsters' DNA, props, and monochromatic colors to increase traffic, gain popularity, and be the go-to sitcom for eerie humor, all at little to no cost. But it didn't stop there. As soon as the show gained popularity, fans clamored for merchandise featuring their favorite friendly monsters. And you can bet that CBS were well aware. Why wouldn't they? There was an open, lucrative market for products ranging from toys and board games to clothing and novelty items, all adorned with the likenesses of Herman, Lily, Grandpa, and the rest of the Munster family. However, behind the scenes of this merchandise boom was an unexpected challenge for the Munster family's dabble into the comic book industry. Established in the 1950s, the Comics Code Authority was created to regulate content in comic books and impose strict guidelines for content. Obscene, illegal, and provocative content were strongly frowned upon, and so were vampires. The Comics Code Authority made it very clear that vampire detections were banned and defaulters would be punished. Given Grandpa Munster and Lily's obvious vampire identity, CBS's Munsters faced a major hurdle. Until, at least, an independent publisher operating outside the jurisdiction of the Comics Code Authority came to life. Yep, Gold Key Comics. Seeing the potential gold mine in the Munsters brand, Gold Key, no pun intended, took a bold step and published a series of comic books featuring the lovable monsters. From 1965 to 1968, they released a total of 16 issues of the Munsters comics, circumventing industry norms by prominently featuring full-color photographs of the show's vampires and stills from the series on their covers. By sidestepping the traditional comic book regulations, Gold Keys not only satisfied the insatiable appetite of Munster faithfuls, but also paved the way for other non-traditional comic adaptations. If it wasn't for this innovative approach, thousands of readers may have never been able to immerse themselves into the full world of the Munsters' adventures.
Well, Grandpa, why don't you give me the cold shoulder like the rest of my loyal family?
Because I happen to have the solution to this whole dilemma.
Number 4, Fred Gwyn and Al Lewis worked together before the show. While there are a gazillion things to love about the Munsters TV show, if we were to ask to pick one thing that stood out to us the most, it has to be the smooth flowing relationship that the cast shared with one another. And the cherry on the top? Herman and Grandpa Munster, father and son-in-law. Despite their differences, they stood out for each other in so many episodes and shared so many laughs together. But it was only possible because the duo had both on-screen and off-screen chemistry. Individually, both actors had the gift of drawing the audience into their acting, and together, they were unstoppable. But here's the thing. What if I told you the Munsters wasn't the first time they'd featured together? Yes, before Fred Gwyn and Al Lewis became Herman and Grandpa, the two actors co-starred in the police comedy sitcom Car 54, Where Are You? Running from 1961 to 1963, the show ran for 2 seasons and followed the adventures of 2 mismatched New York police officers. Car 54, Where Are You? Won the 1962 Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Directorial Achievement in Comedy. And the two actors' familiarity was crystal clear in their performances on the Munsters, which helped sell the tight family dynamic that is the core of the show. Now, I intentionally glossed over this fact earlier, but do you know the true reason why both Gwyn and Lewis had reservations about DiCarlo being cast as Lily? Contrary to what you might think, their concerns weren't due to any animosity between the actors. It had nothing to do with bad blood between the actors. Rather, they were concerned that her background in dramatic roles, such as 1956's The Ten Commandments, for example, was going to clash with their comedic styles. However, DiCarlo soon proved herself to be a versatile actor, and her chemistry with the rest of the cast was unmistakable. So yeah, the producers kinda got lucky on that one. Number 3, the Munsters bridged the gap between Herman and the traditional universal depiction of Frankenstein's monster. While it's easy to say Herman Munster was based on the iconic Frankenstein monster, are they actually cut from the same cloth? There are a lot of reasons to think otherwise. First off, the character of Herman Munster was a more comedic, family-friendly interpretation of the original. And yeah, he had a big heart. The original was a sad, misunderstood character, but Herman was more warm, fuzzy, and super caring. So instead of being a literal monster, Herman is more like a bridge between both worlds, the classic portrayal of Frankenstein's monster and a swashbuckling version. Although this open secret was hardly ever explored in the show, the connection was evident in the episode A Visit from Johann, where Herman meets Johann, the great-grandson of Dr. Frankenstein. As an earlier creation from Frankenstein's experiments, Johann is a simple-minded character who looks just like Herman. Both are played by Fred Gwynne, and he's even dressed like the Frankenstein monster from Son of Frankenstein. Additionally, Herman was also shown to have at least 2 identical brothers. In the delightfully odd early episode, Knock Wood, Here Comes Charlie, Gwynne played Herman's brother, who was a notably stylish con man named Charlie. In any case, introducing the notion of familial ties to the original Frankenstein lineage was a sharp contrast to the fearsome solitary image of Boris Karloff's creature, and frankly, I found it refreshing. Number 2, lost episodes. Can you remember when the Munster family visited Marineland? No, of course you don't. Only a handful of fans who were lucky enough to watch on the 18th of April 1965 saw a special episode of the series that no one would see again for more than 30 years. The Easter special featured the family visiting Marineland of the Pacific in Palos Verdes, California, to find a new pet for Eddie. But alas, it never aired again and was considered lost until a copy was donated to the Paley Center in New York in 1997. The loss of television shows may sound crazy in modern times, but it was often attributed to several key factors. One of them was the archival practices of the time. In the early days of television, many shows were recorded on tape that was frequently reused. Networks often taped over existing footage to save costs, and many early sitcoms and variety shows simply vanished because they were not considered valuable enough to keep. And then there was the problem of physical degradation. Older formats like videotapes were prone to wear and tear, especially when not stored properly. As a result, many shows deteriorated beyond recovery and fell into the abyss of lost television. However, contemporary times have shifted this narrative dramatically. We've got better archival technology, and shows are stored in high-definition formats that are less susceptible to degradation. And don't even get me started on emerging streaming services. So back to the elephant in the room. Did you know that the credits of the Munsters were a playful dig at another show? Yes, the opening credits of the first season were a hilarious parody of the Donna Reed Show. In that show, Donna would tenderly prepare lunches for her family as they left the house, one by one. Similarly, Lily Munster followed this routine in her own unique style. Speaking of which, the theme song for the Munsters was composed by Jack Marshall and received a Grammy Award nomination in 1965. An alternate version with lyrics was created, but never aired.
But you hear mysterious feet at night, then the Munsters are following you.
Number 1. Batman wasn't the only reason why the Munsters got canceled. Nowadays, we might consider a season to have 13 episodes, but in the 1960s, that would have been a sign of early cancellation. 2 seasons were typical for many shows from that time, including several that have become beloved classics. To put things to scale, the Munsters TV show had 70 episodes, spanned across 2 seasons. That's exactly 10 seasons of a 7-episode Netflix series. The Munsters did a lot better in syndication than it ever did on network TV. And despite the fact that color TV broadcast cost had staggeringly decreased, the network was reluctant to spend unnecessary money on altering the Munsters sets and makeup to suit the color format. The makeup was already a pain in the rear for all parties, especially Fred Gwynn, and changing it again to suit colored TV would have been a waste of time and resources. Take a look at Munster Go Home. The makeup and set felt somewhat jarring after 2 seasons in black and white. Lastly, after a brief resurgence in interest in the Universal Monsters, public enthusiasm began to fade. The first season of the Munsters was a remarkable success, tying for 18th place in the ratings with a 24 share. Numbers like that today would make it one of the most watched series on television. And even by mid-1960s standards, those figures were impressive. However, during its sophomore year in 1965, the show dropped to 60th place. As a second season series, it should have been able to maintain its initial momentum, but it failed to do so. And again, it wasn't only because of a colored Batman. With shows like The Munsters, The Addams Family, and even parodies such as The Gruesomes on the Flintstones getting rampant, audiences eventually got bored of the charmingly bizarre characters and began to look elsewhere for entertainment. Plus, the writing quality dipped, and the characters had become too much like caricatures of their former selves. Now, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of great episodes from the 32 made, but I wouldn't be sure it totals a third of the amount. So there you have it, 25 of the most surprising truths about the Munsters TV show. Whether you're a longtime fan or a newcomer, we're sure these revelations have given you a lot to think about. If you found these stories as intriguing as we did, smash the like button and tell us in the comments which revelation caught you off guard the most. But don't leave just yet. There's still more to discover. Be sure to check out the video currently on your screen for another eye-opening look at the hidden truths of Hollywood. See you there.